Now, before we can actually remove the toilet, we need to shut off the water and then drain the tank. The shutoff valve should be located down towards the bottom of the toilet on one side or the other. If not, you will need to go back to the main shutoff valve and shut the water off there. Once the water's off, we can go ahead and flush the toilet and hold the lever down until the tank drains. Now, it is important to note that the water does not fully drain out of the tank. It will only drain down to the level of the flapper. So if you're planning to remove the tank separately, you will want to take a shop vac and clean out the rest of the water. Flushing the toilet, unfortunately, does not empty out the bowl completely either. So to clean out the rest of the water in the bowl, you can take a plunger and force the water out the drain, or take a shop vac and suck out what's left. Next, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the supply line. Now, one thing you can do to make removing the supply line just a little bit easier is first remove the handle on the shutoff valve. This just makes it a little bit easier to get a wrench in there to turn the nut. It is also important to remember that any water left in the tank at this point will drain out once you disconnect the supply line, so it is helpful to have a towel or a bucket handy. Next, we can go ahead and remove our toilet bowl bolts and washers. Now, before removing the toilet, it is a good idea to put something out to set the toilet on so you don't get wax or water on the floor. Now that we've removed all the nuts and washers and disconnected the line, we can go ahead and lift the toilet straight up and remove it. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the toilet ring. Now, in this case, they did use a no wax ring, which is pretty easy to remove, but in most cases I've seen they actually use a standard wax ring. If you do find a standard wax ring, you will want to remove the ring and then remove any wax that's left behind. You'll also want to remove any wax left on the bottom of the toilet if you're planning to reuse it. Then we can go ahead and clean up, remove our bolts, and install the new wax ring. Now, when installing a new wax ring or gasket, I do recommend using a wax-free ring. They usually tend to be a little bit more expensive, but they're definitely easier to install and leave less mess, and they can also be reused. So most no wax rings nowadays come with a spacer and a rubber seal. And what you're going to need to install really depends on the thickness of the floor and the location of the toilet flange. If the toilet flange is even with the height of the floor, or it's about a quarter inch or less below the floor, you need to put the spacer and then put the rubber seal on top. If the toilet flange is a quarter inch or more above the floor, you only need to use the rubber seal. And as you can see in the video, the toilet flange is actually sitting above the floor, so I do not need the spacer. Now, once the ring is in place, we can go ahead and reset the toilet. To set the toilet, all we need to do is line up the holes on the bottom of the bowl with the bolts on the flange, and then lift the toilet over the top of the bolts. Next, we'll go ahead and install the cap and then the nuts for the bolts. Now, the order for this would be the plastic base of the cap, the metal washer, and then the nut. If you have a clear plastic washer as well, that's actually used just to stabilize the bolt on the flange before you actually set the toilet. So if you've already set the toilet, it really isn't necessary at this point. Next, we're going to go ahead and tighten the nut down. Now, you do want to be careful when doing this because over tightening the nut could cause the cap to break or could potentially crack the porcelain. You really only want the nut to be tight enough so that the toilet doesn't rock back and forth and doesn't feel loose. Next, we're going to take our hacksaw and cut the bolt down so that the plastic cap will fit over the top. Now we can go ahead and reconnect the supply line and turn the water back on. If you are installing a new supply line or just reinstalling an old one, it is important to note that the plastic compression fitting at the tank only needs to be about hand tight unless you see it leaking after you turn on the water, whereas the compression fitting at the shutoff valve will need about half to full turn with a 5/8 wrench once it's been hand tightened down. Next, we just want to verify that the water fills up to the water line in the tank. And lastly, we'll just verify there's no leaks at the supply line, and then flush the toilet and verify there's no leaks around the base as well.
All right, guys, as always, thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.